Picture this. You're standing in front of a coffee shop counter on a busy morning. You're tired. You just need a little caffeine. You glance up at the menu. Small coffee, $2.50. Medium, $3.50. Large, $3.75. You were going to buy a small, but when you see the prices, something strange happens. Your brain tells you, well, the medium is only $1 more, and the large is just 25 cents more than that. I'd be stupid not to get the large. You walk away with a giant cup you didn't plan to buy. Did you make a rational choice? Or did your brain fall for a trap called the decoy effect? Or imagine this, you're shopping for a new TV. The first one you see is $1,500. Way too expensive. Then you find another for $800. Suddenly it feels like a bargain, even though it's still a huge purchase. That first price you saw, the anchor has already warped your judgment. Let's try a different scene. You're scrolling online, looking for a new restaurant to try. The very first review you read is glowing. 5 stars. Best meal I've ever had. Instantly your brain leans in that direction. Even if the next 10 reviews are mixed, your mind finds ways to explain them away. You've already decided. You'll go there. And when you do, you'll notice everything that proves that first review right, while ignoring the things that contradict it. That's confirmation bias in action. Or think about the last time you read a shocking news headline. Maybe it was about a plane crash, or a rare disease, or a violent crime. You can't stop thinking about it for days. Then suddenly, you feel like those things are happening all the time. Even though statistically, they're incredibly rare. Your brain tricks you into believing they're common because they're vivid, emotional, easy to recall. That's the availability heuristic. These aren't random quirks. They're patterns. They're part of the invisible machinery of your mind. And the most unsettling part, they don't just influence you once in a while. They shape almost every choice you make, every single day. You decide what to buy, who to trust, who to date, who to vote for, and you think you're being rational. But beneath the surface, invisible forces are nudging you, whispering in your ear, pulling the strings. Psychologists call them cognitive biases. I call them the hidden puppeteers of the human mind. And here's the paradox. While they secretly control your decisions, they also make you feel more confident in those very decisions. That's the cruel trick. You're not only being nudged, you're being convinced you did it all by yourself. Think about the last time you argued with a friend about politics. Both of you brought facts. Both of you were certain you were right. But here's the truth. Both of you were probably just confirming what you already believed. Neither of you was weighing evidence fairly. The bias wasn't in the facts. It was in the filter through which your brain chose those facts. Or remember the time you told yourself, I'm not biased, I'm just logical. That very thought is another bias, the bias blind spot. The belief that biases affect everyone else, but not you. We all fall into it. Even Nobel Prize-winning psychologists admit they can't escape it. This is why understanding biases matters. Because without awareness, they control you completely. With awareness, you can begin to see the strings, and once you see them, you can cut a few of them. Let me give you one last story. In 1976, the city of New York faced a financial crisis. Politicians had to make fast decisions about what to cut, what to save, and how to allocate limited resources. But research later showed that many of those decisions weren't driven by careful logic or long-term vision. They were shaped by framing, by whether a choice was presented as a gain or a loss. The same policy, described in different words, led to radically different decisions. Billions of dollars, thousands of jobs, all hanging on the invisible pull of a bias. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If biases can steer governments and economies, imagine how much they steer your daily life. The shoes you buy, the food you eat, the people you trust, even the memories you choose to keep. So as we step into this episode, I want you to pause and ask yourself a question. What if you're not as in control of your decisions as you think? What if your mind is tricking you every single day? Welcome to the world of cognitive biases. Once you see them, you can never unsee them. And once you learn their names, you start spotting them everywhere in conversations, in advertising, in politics, even in the mirror. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on these invisible puppeteers. We'll uncover the most common, the most powerful, the most dangerous of these biases. We'll see how they operate, how they fool you, and most importantly, what you can do to loosen their grip. Because the truth is, you'll never escape them completely. None of us will. But awareness changes everything. Awareness turns invisible strings into visible ones. And when you see the strings, you can decide maybe, for the first time, which ones you'll let guide you, and which ones you'll cut. Welcome to Think Easy Podcast. Come back to another episode of our journey into the human mind, a podcast where we explore the psychology, the emotions, the hidden forces that quietly shape the way we live, love, and choose. If you're new here, let me say this. You've just stepped into a space where curiosity matters more than certainty. A space where we ask, why do we feel what we feel? Why do we think what we think? And why do we so often do the opposite of what we planned? Today's topic is one of my favorites, because it's both unsettling and liberating. It's unsettling because it reveals just how fragile and biased our minds really are. But it's liberating because once you learn the patterns, once you put names to these invisible forces, you start to see the world and yourself in an entirely new light. We're talking about cognitive biases. Now, maybe you've heard that phrase before. Maybe in a psychology class, maybe in a TED Talk, maybe scrolling through an article online. But here's the truth. It's not just an academic idea. It's not just jargon for scientists. It's something alive, something real, something at work in your life right now. When you chose what to eat for breakfast this morning, when you decided whether to hit the snooze button or get out of bed, when you sized up a stranger on the street, when you judged whether to trust a headline, a salesperson, a smile, in all of those little choices, and the big ones too, biases were at play. They're the silent partners in every decision. Sometimes they help us, often they trick us, and almost always we don't even notice them. Think of them like the operating system of your mind. You rarely see it, you rarely think about it, but it runs everything, and every once in a while it glitches. That glitch is a bias. And if you don't know it's there, you'll keep making the same mistakes, buying what you don't need, trusting who you shouldn't, fearing what's unlikely, ignoring what's important. Here's the paradox. We humans love to believe we're rational, that we weigh evidence carefully, make smart decisions, learn from mistakes. But time and time again, psychology has shown us otherwise. We don't see the world as it is. We see it through filters. We don't weigh every fact equally. We cling to the ones that feel good. We don't decide purely with logic. We decide with shortcuts, emotions, frames. And then, afterward, we invent stories to convince ourselves it was logical all along. That's what makes this topic both fascinating and humbling. Because no one escapes it. Not me, not you. Not the smartest scientist, the most successful entrepreneur, the most disciplined monk. We are all biased. The only difference is whether we know it and what we do about it. In this episode, we're going to peel back the curtain. We'll uncover what cognitive biases really are, why your brain has them, and how they secretly control so many of your decisions. Then we'll dive into some of the most common ones. The anchoring effect, confirmation bias, availability heuristic, framing effect, sunk cost fallacy, each with real stories and vivid examples. You'll recognize them instantly. And once you do, you'll start seeing them everywhere. And here's my promise. This isn't about shaming you for being irrational. It's about empowering you with awareness. Because once you name the bias, once you see the string, you can decide whether to let it pull you or to cut it. So take a breath, settle in, maybe grab a notebook, or just let your mind wander with me. Because what you're about to learn could change not only how you see your decisions, but how you see yourself. Let's begin. So let's start at the beginning. Before we dive into all the different names and types, let's answer the simplest question. What exactly is a cognitive bias? At its core, a cognitive bias is a shortcut. Think about the sheer number of decisions you face every single day. What to wear, what to eat, whether to answer that email now or later, which route to take to work, how to interpret the tone in your boss's text, who to trust, who to ignore. If your brain stopped to carefully analyze every single one of those choices, weighing every option, considering every variable, you'd collapse under the weight of decision fatigue before breakfast. So instead, the brain takes shortcuts. It uses quick rules of thumb, mental scripts, patterns learned from the past. And most of the time, these shortcuts work beautifully. They save energy. They allow you to function. They keep you alive. Imagine you're driving and suddenly a ball rolls into the street. You don't pause to calculate probabilities. You slam on the brakes because your brain has a shortcut. Ball gives child, gives danger. That shortcut saves lives. Or think about language. When you read a sentence, you don't sound out every letter slowly. You recognize words, patterns, meanings instantly. Shortcuts again. In this sense, biases aren't flaws, they're features. They're why our species has survived. They allow fast judgments when time is short. But here's the catch. Shortcuts can also mislead us. They can take us down the wrong path. They can trick us into believing we're being rational, when in fact, we're following a glitch in the system. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine your brain is a GPS. Most of the time, it guides you correctly. But every so often it glitches. It sends you down a dead-end street, or the long way around. You trust it because it usually works. But in those moments, the very tool designed to help you misguides you. That glitch is what we call a bias. The most unsettling part. You usually don't notice the mistake until you've already taken the wrong turn. Back in the early 2000s, during the dot-com boom, millions of people poured money into internet companies they barely understood. Stock prices soared. People felt invincible. And even when signs of collapse appeared, investors held on. Why? Not because of rational analysis, but because of a bias called the sunk cost fallacy. The belief that once you've invested time, money, or energy, you should stick with it, even if logic says to walk away. This wasn't just individual greed. It was human psychology at scale. The very wiring that once helped us survive. Don't waste, don't abandon, keep pushing, led to one of the biggest financial crashes in history. That's the power of cognitive biases. They don't just shape small daily choices. They can move markets, topple industries, and change history. The phrase cognitive bias was popularized in the 1970s by two psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They discovered something radical. Humans are not the rational calculators we like to imagine. We don't carefully weigh evidence like computers. Instead, we rely on heuristics, mental shortcuts, that systematically lead us to predictable errors. Their research was so groundbreaking that decades later, Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics. Think about that, a psychologist winning an economics prize because human irrationality was reshaping markets, more than mathematical models ever predicted. Here's the tricky part. Biases are invisible. You don't feel them happening. In fact, the stronger the bias, the more certain you feel that your decision is rational. It's like wearing tinted glasses without knowing it. Everything you see is colored, but you believe you're seeing the world as it truly is. This is what psychologists call the bias blind spot, the tendency to believe that biases affect other people more than they affect us. You probably know someone who makes impulsive purchases, who clings to bad relationships, who always assumes the worst. It's easy to see their errors. But ask yourself, how often do you spot your own? Another important thing. Biases aren't random mistakes. They're systematic. That means if we put 100 people in the same situation, we can often predict how most of them will are. For example, show two groups the same medical treatment. Tell one group it has a 90% survival rate, and the other group it has a 10% mortality rate. Logically, those statements are identical. But emotionally, the first group feels safer. The second feels anxious. Same facts, different framing, predictable bias. That's why marketers, politicians, even negotiators study these patterns. They know if they frame, anchor, or trigger the right bias, they can tilt your decision without you noticing. Here's another way to think about it. Every bias is like a story your brain tells to simplify reality. Anchoring bias says, the first number you see matters most. Confirmation bias says, what you already believe must be true. Availability heuristic says, If it comes to mind easily, it must be common. These stories save time, but they're also half-truths. And living by half-truths means sometimes you buy the wrong shoes, trust the wrong person, or even vote for the wrong leader. Let me leave you with this thought experiment before we dive into specific biases. Imagine your brain is a courtroom. Facts are witnesses. Logic is the judge. But sitting in the jury box are your biases. And here's the twist. Those jurors whisper to the judge, distort the testimony, and sometimes even decide the verdict before the trial begins. You think justice has been served, that your decision was fair and rational. But in truth, the outcome was written before the trial even started. That's how powerful biases are. They don't just shape your decisions. They shape the very process you use to decide. So now we know, cognitive biases are mental shortcuts. They're the glitches in the system, the tinted glasses, the whispering jurors in the courtroom of your mind. The next step is to meet them face to face, to call them by name, to see exactly how they work in real life. Because once you recognize the patterns, you can't unsee them. In the next part, we'll explore the most common and most dangerous biases, the anchoring effect, confirmation bias, availability heuristic, and more. With real stories and vivid examples, you'll start to see just how much control they've had over your life, without you even realizing it. Let's start with one of the most powerful, the anchoring effect. Imagine walking into a car dealership. You've already decided you can spend about $25,000 on a car, but the salesman greets you with a smile and points to a gleaming SUV. This one starts at $50,000. You immediately think, way too high. But then he shows you another option for $28,000. And suddenly, $28,000 doesn't feel unreasonable. In fact, compared to the $50,000 car, it feels like a bargain. What happened? That first number became an anchor. Even though it had nothing to do with your budget, it framed the entire conversation. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky famously demonstrated this. They asked people to spin a wheel with random numbers, then estimate the percentage of African nations in the UN. The wheel was rigged, it was pure chance. But the number people saw influenced their guesses. High spin, high guess. Low spin, low guess. Anchoring shows up everywhere. In shopping, in salary negotiations, even in courtrooms. Judges have been shown to give harsher sentences when prosecutors request higher penalties, if they know the request is extreme. So here's your takeaway. Whenever you hear the first number in any decision, pause. Ask yourself, is this number truly relevant, or is it just an anchor sinking into my mind? Now let's move to confirmation bias, maybe the most dangerous of them all. Picture this, it's election season. You already support one candidate. As you scroll through social media, every positive story about them feels true. Every negative story about the opponent feels true. And when the reverse happens, you dismiss it. Fake news. Biased reporting. That's confirmation bias, the tendency to notice and accept information that supports what we already believe, and to ignore or attack information that challenges us. Psychologists ran a study. They gave people two sets of scientific research, one supporting capital punishment, one opposing it. Both had flaws. People rated the study that matched their beliefs as solid and convincing, and the one that opposed them as weak and flawed. Same evidence, different filter. It divides societies. It fuels conspiracy theories, and it traps us in echo chambers. But it also shapes daily life. If you believe your partner is kind, you'll notice every small act of thoughtfulness and ignore their flaws. If you believe they're careless, you'll notice every mistake and forget the good. So here's the challenge. Next time you feel too certain, ask yourself, am I searching for truth, or just for validation? Let's talk about fear. After September 11, 2001, many Americans believed terrorist attacks were likely to happen frequently, even though statistically, the chance was incredibly low. After news reports of shark attacks, beach attendance plummets even though vending machines kill more people each year than sharks. This is the availability heuristic. We judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily examples come to mind. The brain confuses vividness with frequency. If something is dramatic, emotional, or easy to recall, we think it happens often even when it's rare. That's why parents fear kidnappings more than car accidents. It's why people buy lottery tickets after seeing a winner on TV. It's why we fear flying but not texting while driving. The key question to break this bias: is my fear or hope based on real numbers or on vivid stories stuck in memory? Here's one of my favorites: the framing effect. Doctors once told two groups of patients about a surgery. Group A heard, "This surgery has a 90% survival rate." Group B heard, "This surgery has a 10% mortality rate." Logically, identical. Emotionally, worlds apart. Group A felt reassured. Group B felt anxious. That's the framing effect. When the way information is presented changes how we interpret it. Marketers exploit this all the time. A yogurt isn't 10% fat, it's 90% fat-free. A politician doesn't promise spending cuts, they offer tax relief. Same reality, different frame, different decision. Lesson: whenever you hear statistics, ask, what's the opposite frame? What's the raw fact beneath the spin? Think of the last movie you paid to watch that turned out terrible. Did you leave halfway? Or did you stay because I already paid for it? That's the sunk cost fallacy, continuing to invest in something just because you've already invested, even if it makes no sense. It's why people stay in failing relationships, why they keep jobs they hate, why companies pour billions into doomed projects. Psychologists find people will even eat more bad food if they've already paid, rather than waste it. The money is gone either way, but the brain hates admitting loss. The antidote is simple. Ask yourself, if I were starting fresh today, would I still choose this? If not, it's a sunk cost trap. You meet someone who's stunningly attractive. They smile. Instantly you think, they must be kind, they must be smart, they must be trustworthy. That's the halo effect. One positive trait, like beauty, casts a glow that makes us assume other positive traits. Research shows jurors are more lenient with attractive defendants. Teachers expect more from good-looking students, and those students often perform better, not because they're smarter, but because expectations change behavior. The reverse is the horns effect. One negative trait, like a scowl or a mistake, overshadows everything else. The truth is, people are complex. The glow of the halo blinds us. So next time you're charmed, pause. Am I seeing the person, or just the glow? Imagine interviewing 5 candidates for our excellent. The last one stumbles. Who do you remember most? Probably the last one, because of recency bias. We weigh recent information more heavily than earlier information. That's why students cram before exams. It works. That's why in competitions, the final performance often feels more impressive. Recency shapes investing too. People chase stocks that recently surged, forgetting long-term fundamentals. The fix: zoom out. Look at the whole timeline, not just the last moment. One of the most shocking studies in psychology, Stanley Milgram's obedience experiment. Participants were told to administer electric shocks to a stranger. In reality, no shocks were given. But because a man in a white lab coat said, "Please continue," most participants delivered shocks they thought could kill. That's authority bias. We give undue weight to people in positions of power, symbols of expertise, or even just the right uniform. It's why we trust celebrities selling products. Why we obey flawed advice from a doctor or a boss without questioning. Authority can be useful, but it can also be deadly. The question to ask: do I believe this because it's true, or just because of who said it? During the crypto boom, millions poured into Bitcoin not because they understood it, but because everyone else is doing it. That's the bandwagon effect, the tendency to adopt beliefs or behaviors simply because many others have. It's powerful because our brains evolved to survive in groups. Being excluded was once life-threatening. So when we see the crowd moving, we feel pulled to join. But crowds can be wrong. History is full of bubbles, panics, and fads that ended in disaster. So before jumping on the bandwagon, ask, am I choosing this because it makes sense? Or just because I don't want to be left out? Finally, let's talk about optimism bias. We underestimate risks when they apply to us. Smokers know cigarettes cause cancer, but believe it won't happen to me. Drivers know accidents happen, but think they're safer than others. Young people believe illness debt, or regret belong to someone else. MRI scans show that when people hear bad news about risks, the brain actively downplays it, almost editing it out. It's a protective mechanism, but it blinds us. Optimism bias has two sides. It fuels hope, ambition, and resilience. But it also makes us reckless side, ignoring savings, insurance, or health checkups. The antidote: balance. Be hopeful, but grounded. Dream big, but plan for reality. So there you have it, 10 of the most common, most powerful cognitive biases: anchoring, confirmation, availability, framing, sunk cost, halo, recency, authority, bandwagon, and optimism. Each one is like a hidden puppeteer, pulling the strings of your mind, shaping decisions while convincing you that you're in control. Now, you might be wondering, if these biases are so strong, do we even stand a chance? Can we resist them? Can we outsmart our own brain? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next part. Biases thrive in speed. Supermarkets know this. Candy at checkout, flash sales, countdown timers, all designed to force quick judgment. A story: in 1982, Johnson & Johnson faced the Tylenol cyanide crisis. Public demanded answers fast. Instead of rushing, CEO James Burke slowed down, consulted experts, and recalled 31 million bottles. Costly, yes, but slowing down saved the brand. Science experiments show that a 2-second delay in decision-making drastically reduces anchoring and framing effects. Practice: adopt the March 24, 72 rule. 3 breaths for small choices. 24 hours for medium ones. 72 hours for big, life-changing ones. Takeaway: speed is bias's ally. Time is your armor. Imagine hearing, "This job has a 70% chance of failure." Most people panic. But reframe, "This job has a 30% chance of success." Suddenly, hope returns. Same math, different story. Science: cognitive reappraisal studies show reframing activates the prefrontal cortex and calms the amygdala. Practice: whenever you hear a claim, force yourself to state it in reverse. If someone says you lost 20%, reply internally with, "I still kept 80%. Takeaway: you don't control the facts, but you control the frame. Pilots don't rely on memory. They rely on checklists. Why? Because human minds are predictably flawed. Story: Atal Gawande's book, The Checklist Manifesto, showed how introducing checklists in hospitals reduced surgical deaths by 47%. Science: externalizing decision steps reduces cognitive load, minimizing bias slip-ins. Practice: make a bias checklist. Am I anchored by the first number? Am I cherry-picking evidence? Am I overvaluing vivid stories? Am I influenced by authority or popularity? If I started today, would I still choose this? Takeaway: you can't outthink every bias, but you can outlist them. Story: Abraham Lincoln built a team of rivals cabinet, filling it with people who disagreed with him. That diversity of thought helped him navigate the Civil War. Science: studies in group psychology show dissent increases accuracy of decisions by 30%, even if the dissenting voice is wrong. It breaks groupthink. Practice: before a big choice, ask a friend to argue against you. Write down 3 reasons you might be wrong. Read one source that opposes your view. Takeaway: your brain loves agreement. Truth hides in disagreement. Story: in Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus tied himself to the mast to resist the siren's song. That's a pre-commitment strategy. Science: behavioral economics calls these Ulysses contracts committing in advance to avoid bias. Example: setting auto savings so you can't impulsively spend. Practice: use apps that block impulse purchases. Schedule no decision zones where you won't commit to big choices while emotional. Takeaway: the best time to fight bias is before it strikes. Story: after a plane crash, people cancel flights, but statistically, air travel remains the safest mode of transport. That's availability heuristic at work. Science: Kahneman's research shows numbers beat anecdotes, but humans naturally trust stories more. Practice: when faced with fear or hype, ask, what do the numbers say? Separate data from drama. One vivid story does not equal common reality. Takeaway: stories move hearts, but numbers reveal truth. Biases ride emotions. Anchoring sticks when you're excited. Sunk costs trap you when you're afraid of loss. Confirmation bias locks in when you're angry. Science. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio showed patients with damaged emotional centers made better logical decisions, but worse life decisions overall. We need emotions, but we must notice them. Practice. When emotions spike, whisper, bias check. Journal. What bias might be driving this feeling? Takeaway: you can't silence emotions, but you can catch them before they hijack you. Kahneman himself admitted, "I wrote the book on biases, but I'm still biased every day." Awareness doesn't delete bias, but it sharpens humility. Story. Warren Buffett credits his investing success not to genius, but to humility. Admitting mistakes fast, cutting sunk costs, resisting bandwagons. Science. Growth mindset research shows that viewing mistakes as learning reduces blind spots. Practice. Keep a bias journal. Log one bias decision each week. Celebrate catching yourself biased. That's progress, not failure. Takeaway: the greatest bias is thinking you're free of bias. So let's be clear. You will never fully escape biases. They're stitched into the fabric of being human. But you don't need to erase them. You need to see them. You need tools, time framing, checklists, dissent, pre-commitments, data, emotional awareness, humility. Each one loosens the strings of the invisible puppeteers. Each one returns a little more choice back to you. And that is the real victory, not perfection, but awareness. Not being bias-free, but being bias-free. In the next part, we'll look at what happens when these biases scale up. When it's not just one person's choice, but whole societies, markets, governments, being steered by invisible strings. And that's where things get both fascinating and a little terrifying. Story. In 1960, the United States held its first televised presidential debate. John F. Kennedy versus Richard Nixon, on radio. Most listeners judged Nixon the winner. His words were sharper, his logic sounder. But on TV, Nixon appeared pale, sweating under the lights, his posture slouched, his 5 o'clock shadow visible. Kennedy, by contrast, looked calm, tan, and confident. TV viewers overwhelmingly declared Kennedy the winner. Historians believe that moment helped swing the election. Biases at play. Halo effect. Kennedy's looks and confidence projected competence. Availability heuristic. Nixon's sweat became the vivid, sticky memory. Recency bias. Kennedy's closing remarks lingered. Science. Decades of political psychology show that voters rarely dive into policy details. Instead, they rely on thin slices, tiny cues of appearance, tone, or charisma. In one study, researchers showed people silent video clips of political candidates for just 1 second. Participants predicted the winner with surprising accuracy, not from policies, but from looks. Consequence: entire nations may tilt, not on reasoned debate, but on subconscious bias. Think about that. Nuclear policies, economic plans, foreign relations, influenced by who sweats less on camera. Reflection: democracy assumes rational citizens. Reality: we're biased, emotional, and easily swayed. The question is, can democracies survive if voters don't recognize their own shortcuts? Story 1. During the late 1990s dot-com bubble, companies with no products or revenue were valued at billions. Investors piled in because everyone else was. This was bandwagon effect, an optimism bias at scale. When the bubble burst, $5 trillion evaporated. Story 2. In 2008, banks packaged risky mortgages as safe. Rating agencies nodded along, and investors convinced themselves housing prices could only rise. This was confirmation bias meeting sunk cost fallacy. When the bubble popped, millions lost jobs and homes. Science. Behavioral economics proves markets are not rational machines, but collective psychology. Anchoring influences price expectations. Framing sways investor optimism. Recency bias makes traders chase hot stocks. Consequence: trillions lost, pensions destroyed, families uprooted. Not by math errors, but by psychology errors. Reflection. The stock ticker may look like numbers, but each flicker is human fear, greed, and bias on public display. Story. In 2016, Facebook's algorithm prioritized engagement. And what drives engagement? Outrage, fear, validation. Confirmation bias meant people clicked what aligned with their beliefs. The algorithm amplified it, feeding echo chambers. Soon, Americans lived in parallel realities, same events, opposite truths. Science, availability heuristic. Rare but shocking crimes dominate news cycles. Framing effect, tax relief versus government cuts. Negativity bias, bad news spreads faster because fear grabs the amygdala. Consequence, public opinion is no longer shaped by a shared reality, but by fragmented, biased narratives. Polarization grows. Civil discourse weakens. Reflection. The challenge isn't just fake news. It's that our brains crave bias-compatible news. Until citizens know their own biased diet, democracy is malnourished. Story 1. World War I European leaders believed the war would be over by Christmas. That was optimism bias. They sought intelligence confirming their strategies, ignoring contradictions. That was confirmation bias. Anchored in outdated 19th century tactics, they sent millions into trench slaughter. The war lasted for years. Story 2. Vietnam War. US leaders knew victory was unlikely, but sunk costs kept them escalating. Each life lost made withdrawal feel impossible. That's the sunk cost fallacy, turning a bad decision into a generational tragedy. Story 3. Iraq War, 2003. Leaders anchored on the idea of weapons of mass destruction. Evidence contradicting it was ignored. Bias paved the road to war. Science. Under stress, biases amplify. Crisis leaders revert to heuristics, overvalue recent data, and overtrust confident advisors. Consequence. Wars are not purely strategy and logic. They're bias at scale, optimism, anchoring, confirmation written in blood, reflection. History isn't just politics and battles. It's the story of human minds repeating the same psychological mistakes, generation after generation. Story. During the pandemic, toilet paper vanished from shelves worldwide. Why toilet paper? Not logic, but bandwagon effect. If others are hoarding, you feel you must too. Availability heuristic. Empty shelves became vivid symbols of crisis. Story 2. Charity data shows people give more to one identifiable child in need than to millions described as statistics. That's the identifiable victim effect. Our empathy responds to stories, not numbers. Story 3. Sports fans believe their team is destined to win after one victory. That's recency bias. Entire cities surged with optimism or despair based on one game. Science. Social psychologists call this social proof. We looked at the crowd for signals. It kept our ancestors alive in tribes, but in modern society, it creates panic buying, hype cycles, and fads. Consequence. Our daily lives, from what we buy to how we panic, are shaped less by logic than by the invisible gravity of the crowd. Reflection. Awareness doesn't make us cold, it makes us wise. We can still care deeply, but we can balance story with statistics, crowd with conscience. So here's the sobering truth. Biases don't just bend individual choices. They bend history. They tilt elections. They inflate bubbles. They fuel wars. They polarize nations. They empty shelves. The puppeteers of the mind become puppet masters of societies. And unless we see the strings, we risk repeating the same collective illusions. But here's the hope. Awareness scales too. A leader who spots sunk costs can end a war. A journalist who spots framing can restore balance. A citizen who knows their own confirmation bias is harder to manipulate. Bias is powerful, but so is awareness. And that leads us to our final part. How do we live with this knowledge? How do we carry awareness of bias, not as a burden, but as a compass? How do we, in the end, make peace with our imperfect minds? We've traveled a long road together in this episode. We began with small, everyday moments, buying shoes on sale, reading reviews online, scrolling headlines, arguing with friends. Harmless, right? But then we saw how these tiny shortcuts, These biases quietly shape not only what we buy and who we trust, but who we vote for, how we fight wars, and even how economies rise and fall. We learned what cognitive biases are. Shortcuts of the mind, designed to save time, but prone to predictable errors. We met the famous ones: anchoring, confirmation, availability, framing, sunk costs, halo, recency, authority, bandwagon, optimism. We saw how each one whispers into our decisions. We then asked, can we fight back? We explored tools: slowing down, reframing, checklists, dissent, pre-commitments, trusting data over drama, emotional awareness, humility, not to erase bias, but to loosen its grip. And in the last part, we zoomed out. We saw biases scaled up, in elections, in markets, in media, in wars, in daily life. And we realized, history itself is not just strategy and logic. It's psychology written across nations. Now, in this final chapter, let's bring it all together. Let's ask, what do we do with this knowledge? How should we live, knowing we are never free from bias? And how can we carry awareness not as a burden, but as a compass? Here's the humbling truth. You will never escape bias. Not me, not you, not the wisest monk, or the sharpest scientist. Kahneman himself, who won the Nobel Prize for studying biases, admitted, I wrote the book on biases, but I'm still biased every day, and that's okay. Biases are not flaws to be deleted. They're features of the human mind. They kept our ancestors alive. They let us make fast choices when lions roared in the grass. They helped us bond in tribes, trust leaders, and find meaning in stories. The problem is not that we're biased. The problem is that we forget we're biased. The real danger is the illusion of pure rationality, the belief that I see the world as it is, when in fact we see the world as we are. Imagine watching a puppet show. The puppets dance, fight, laugh. At first, you believe they're alive. But then you look up, and you see the strings. Does that ruin the show? Or does it reveal the deeper artistry? Bias awareness works the same way. Once you see the strings, you can't unsee them. Advertisements, headlines, debates, even your own thoughts, you'll notice the pull. And that noticing is power. It doesn't mean you stop the pull, but it means you get to ask, do I want to follow this string, or do I want to cut it? Awareness brings humility. When you realize you're biased, you stop being so quick to judge others. You see that the friend trapped in confirmation bias isn't foolish, they're human. The investor who clung to sunk costs isn't irrational, they're human. The leader who fell for optimism, bias, and war isn't evil, they're human. Humility also makes you curious. Instead of defending your certainty, you ask, what bias might I be under right now? What's the other frame? What am I not seeing? In a world tearing itself apart with polarization, that humility may be our most urgent medicine. Bias awareness is not just personal, it's political, economic, cultural. Imagine if schools taught children not just math and science, but bias literacy. Imagine if voters recognized framing tricks in campaign ads. Imagine if leaders admitted sunk costs and cut losses faster. Imagine if news outlets highlighted probability as much as they highlight drama. Society would still be biased, but it would be wiser, more self-aware, less easily manipulated. Bias literacy could be the civic education of the 21st century. Just as we teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, perhaps we must also teach cognitive self-defense. So how do we live with this, day to day? In relationships, notice your halo effect. Ask, am I seeing the whole person, or just one glow or flaw? In decisions, notice sunk costs. Ask, if I started fresh today, would I still choose this? In fears, notice availability. Ask, am I afraid because it's common, or because it's vivid? In news, notice framing. Ask, what's the opposite way to state this fact? In money, notice bandwagons. Ask, am I joining because I believe, or because I don't want to be left out? These small questions are like mirrors. They don't remove bias, but they let you see your reflection more clearly. Let's pause here. Because if all we focus on is bias, life can feel heavy. I can't trust my own mind. I'm always flawed. I'm never rational. But here's the beauty. Imperfection is human. Bias is not a curse. It's part of the messy, beautiful way we navigate life. Think about love. Falling in love is full of bias. Halo effect, optimism bias, confirmation bias. But without those, would love even feel like love? Think about hope. Optimism bias makes us underestimate risks, but it also gives us courage to try, to build, to dream. Think about stories. Availability heuristic makes us believe vivid tales more than statistics. But stories are what give life meaning. Biases mislead us, but they also make us human. The goal is not to erase them, but to dance with them wisely. So here's where we end. Every day, every choice, you are both puppet and player. Strings tug at you, anchoring, confirmation, framing, availability. You can't cut them all, but you can see them. You can name them. You can pause, reflect, reframe, invite dissent, humble yourself. And in that pause, in that awareness, something shifts. You stop being only a puppet. You become a player. You don't control the stage, but you choose your steps. The hidden puppeteers of the mind don't disappear. But once you see them, you can dance with them. And sometimes, in that dance, you can even lead. Here we are. We've reached the end of today's journey. If you've stayed with me from the very first story, Sarah and Daniel in the interview room, all the way through the hidden shortcuts of the brain, the strategies to outsmart them, the sweeping scale of biases shaping elections, markets, and wars, then first, let me say this, thank you. You could have been anywhere, listening to music, watching a show, scrolling endlessly. But you chose to spend this time with me, exploring the hidden puppeteers of the mind. And that choice means something. It means you care about how you think. It means you're willing to hold up a mirror to your own mind. That takes courage, and I don't take it lightly. Podcasting is strange, isn't it? I'm here, speaking into a microphone. You're there, somewhere in the world, maybe commuting, maybe cooking, maybe lying awake at night. And yet, across the distance, we've shared something intimate, the secret workings of our minds. So before I close, I want to acknowledge that connection. I want you to feel seen, not just as a listener, but as a fellow traveler. Because that's what this is. Not a lecture, not a sermon, but a journey we're walking together. And every time you come back, that journey deepens. Now, as you step back into your life after this episode, you'll encounter decisions. Some small, some large, and the strings of bias will tug at you. You'll see a sail and feel the anchor pulling. You'll read a headline and feel the frame tilting. You'll argue with a friend and feel confirmation bias whisper, I'm right. And maybe, just maybe, you'll pause, you'll breathe, you'll remember this conversation. You'll ask, wait, what bias might be tugging at me right now? And in that pause, you'll reclaim just a little more freedom. That's all I hope for, not perfection, not bias-free purity, just a little more awareness, a little more choice, a little more humanity. And if today stirred something in you, if you found yourself nodding, reflecting, maybe even arguing with me in your head, I'd love for you to keep the conversation alive. Here's how. Share this episode with one person you know who loves thinking deeply. Write down one bias you noticed in yourself this week and keep it in a journal. If you want, connect with me on your platform of choice and tell me which bias surprised you most. Which one hit home? Because the truth is, awareness grows when it's shared. The more we name these hidden forces out loud, the less power they have over us. And you, yes you, can be part of spreading that awareness. And before I let you go, let me give you a glimpse of what's coming next. Today we explored the hidden biases that shape our decisions. But what about the times when it isn't just shortcuts steering us? It's us sabotaging ourselves. Think about it. You want to succeed, but you procrastinate. You want to love, but you push people away. You want to be healthy, but you reach for the thing that harms you. Why? Why do we stand in our own way? That's what we'll explore in the next episode, why we self-sabotage, and how to stop. It's a story of fear, of hidden beliefs, of the strange ways our minds can be, both our best friend and our worst enemy. And I promise you, it will be raw, it will be human, and it just might change the way you see yourself forever. So, as we close today, let me leave you with this. You don't need to be bias-free. You only need to be bias-aware. You don't need to control every string. You only need to notice them. And when you notice, you choose. Every handshake, every purchase, every headline, every vote. These are not small moments, they are openings. And in those openings, you decide whether to dance with the puppeteers or to take back the stage as a player. Thank you for lending me your ears, your thoughts, your time. Until we meet again, may you walk through your days with a little more clarity, a little more humility, and a lot more compassion for yourself, and for the beautifully biased humans all around you. This is Think Easy Podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode.